Chapter 24. Ambler opened his eyes, focused on the pallid auditor, and began to speak, providing as detailed a recounting of his movements and observations as he could. Time had fogged thousands of details, and yet the lineaments of the episode were now vivid to him. "I was afraid you'd blacked out there for a while," Caston said, after Ambler had spoken for 5 minutes without pausing. "Glad to have you back among the living." He put down the publication he had been reading, the Journal of Applied Mathematics and Stochastic Analysis. "Now, will you get the hell off my bed?" "Sorry." Ambler stretched, got up, and sat down in the mustard-colored chair. He must have nodded off. According to his watch, 4 hours had passed. So Transience was Ellen Whitfield herself. It was the alias she used back when she was in the field. When the files went digital, all that stuff was lost. No official records were to be retained, especially when it came to her own records. She wanted a total scrub. She said it was a security precaution. "Explains why the name didn't pull anything," Caston said. He regarded the operative silently for a moment. "You want another drink?" Ambler shrugged. "They got some mineral water in the minibar?" "Oh, sure, they got some Evian. With the current exchange rate, it comes out to $9.25 for 500 milliliters. That's 16.9 ounces. So it's like 55 cents an ounce. 55 cents for an ounce of water, enough to make me throw up." Ambler sighed. "I guess I should admire your precision." "What are you talking about? I'm rounding like crazy." "Please tell me you don't have a family." Caston reddened. "You must drive them crazy." "Not at all," the auditor said, almost smiling, "because, you see, they don't listen to a word I say." "That must drive you crazy." "Actually, it suits me just fine." There was a funny look on the auditor's face for a moment, and Ambler caught a glimpse of an attitude that was almost worshipful. The dry-as-dust auditor was a doting father, Ambler realized with surprise. Then Caston returned to the matter at hand, abruptly businesslike. "The man who is with Undersecretary Whitfield, seated in her library. Describe him to me in as much detail as you can." Ambler now looked off into the distance and brought the image to mind. A man in his 60s, silver hair, carefully groomed, above a high forehead. The forehead was remarkably unlined, the face fine-featured and studious-looking, the cheekbones high, the chin strong. Ambler started to describe the figure he recalled. Caston listened and again lapsed into silence. Then he stood up, agitated. A vein was pulsing on his forehead. "It can't be," he breathed. "It's what I remember," Ambler said. "You're describing... but it's impossible." "Out with it." Caston fiddled with his laptop computer, which he had plugged into the phone jack. After typing in a few commands into a search engine, he stepped aside and gestured for Ambler to take a look. The screen was filled with the image of a man, the very man Ambler had seen at Whitfield's house. "That's him," Ambler confirmed, his voice hard with tension. "Do you know who that man is?" Ambler shook his head. "His name is Ashton Palmer. Whitfield studied with him when she was a graduate student." Ambler shrugged. "So?" "Later she repudiated him and everything he stood for, had no contact with him whatever. She wouldn't have had a career otherwise." "I don't understand." "Ashton Palmer, the name doesn't ring any bells?" "Only vaguely," Ambler said. "Maybe you're too young. There was a time, 25 years ago, when he was the brightest light of the foreign policy establishment. Wrote some widely reprinted articles in Foreign Affairs. Both political parties were wooing him. He gave seminars in the old Executive Office building, in the West Wing, in the goddamn Oval Office. People hung on his every word. He was given an honorary appointment in the State Department, but he was bigger than that. He was destined to be the next Kissinger. one of those men whose vision leaves an imprint on history for good or bad. So what happened? A lot of people would say he self-destructed, or maybe he just miscalculated. He came to be recognized as an extremist, a dangerous fanatic. He may have figured that his political and intellectual authority had reached a level where he could express his views frankly and win people over to them by the simple fact that it was he who was making the arguments. If so, he was wrong. The views he expressed were dangerous and would have put this country on a collision course with history. He gave a particularly incendiary speech at the Macmillan Institute for Foreign Policy in D.C., and afterward a number of countries, thinking that he represented the government or some faction of the government, actually threatened to recall their ambassadors. Can you imagine? Hard to. The Secretary of State spent all night working the phones, practically overnight. Palmer became persona non grata. He took up a teaching position in the Ivy Leagues, built an academic center of his own, was appointed to the board of directors of a somewhat fringe think tank in Washington. This image is taken from the Harvard website, but anyone at State who was too closely associated with him became an object of suspicion. So none of his people got anywhere. Actually, there are lots of Palmerites all throughout government, brilliant students, graduates of Harvard's Kennedy School or its graduate program in government. But if you want to have a career anyway, you can't admit to being a Palmerite, and you certainly can't maintain any connection to the old rogue. Makes sense. Yet you saw the two of them together, and that doesn't. Slow down. We're talking about a major player of the State Department in the company of Professor Ashton Palmer. Do you realize how explosive that is? Do you realize how utterly ruinous that could have been to her? As a great American jurist once said, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and it was the one thing they couldn't afford. Ambler narrowed his eyes, brought back Ellen Whitfield's rage model countenance. Now he understood the fear that he sensed in her. So this is what it was all about? I wouldn't hazard that it was all about that. Caston was precise as ever. But for a high-ranking member of the State Department, maintaining ties with Palmer was career suicide. As the head of the Political Stabilization Unit especially, Whitfield simply couldn't afford to have any ongoing association with Palmer. Ambler leaned back and reflected. Whitfield, a glib and fluent liar, could probably have explained away Palmer's presence to anybody else. But Ambler was the one person she could never hope to deceive. That's why he was railroaded. That was the intelligence she couldn't afford to have leaked. The tape of his paranoid ravings, then, was an insurance policy, establishing that nothing he said could be taken at face value. She must have panicked that night and activated a 918 PSE, the rarely used protocol for a psychiatric emergency involving a clandestine officer. Because he had spoken of having taken precautions, implying that damaging information would be released in the event of his death, she must have concluded that the only solution was to lock him away and then try to make him disappear. Ambler felt his heart hammering as he tried to make sense of how such a small incident had precipitated such a major upheaval in his existence. Yet what was she covering up? Just a personal relationship? Or something more? He excused himself and used his cell phone to call Laurel. He gave her the names of the two principals. At the mammoth Bibliothèque Nationale de France in the 8th arrondissement, they agreed. She would be able to search the scholarly archives for relevant materials that would not easily be accessible through other means. He felt a little calmer by the time he'd rung off, and he realized why he had really called her. He needed to hear her voice. It was as simple as that. Laurel Howland had stood between him and complete despair. She remained a beacon of sanity in a world that indeed seemed mad. After a while, Caston turned to him. Something was on his mind. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Ambler nodded distantly. "What's your name?" "Nothing but the best for Paul Fenton," Undersecretary Whitfield reflected as he invited her into his rooms, the Empire Suite at the elegant Hotel George V. The 8th-floor hotel, located midway between the Arc de Triomphe and the Seine, was perhaps the most celebrated in the city, and with reason. Most rooms were elegantly appointed in a light and airy version of Louis XVI style. Not the Empire Suite, which made the others look Bauhaus austere. At the Empire Suite, a grand entrance foyer opened onto a spacious salon and an adjoining seating and dining area. There was even a powder room off the salon for visitors, guests of the guest. The suite was densely decorated with paintings and sculptures rendering homage to Napoleon and Josephine. Aside from the walls, which were upholstered in a yellow-gold fabric, the early Empire theme was rendered in green hues and dark woods. Bronzes and flower vases cropped up everywhere in arboreal profusion. From the window, one could see a breathtaking skyline of the City of Light, with Les Invalides, Montparnasse Tower, and of course the Eiffel Tower, clearly visible. Ellen Whitfield appreciated the view. The suite itself struck her as appalling. To her discriminating eye, it was terribly overdone, cluttered, garish, the worst kind of fustian. Yet Fenton's whole career was a testament to the idea that nothing succeeded like excess. Fenton, ruddy, ginger-haired, bear-like, led her into the salon, where they sat on green-striped chairs across a small glass table. She ran her fingertips down the arms of the chair, which were of wood, adorned with gilded bronze ornaments and some sort of Egyptian motif. "I don't know whether I've ever fully told you how grateful I am, how grateful we all are, for everything you've done for us over the years." Whitfield spoke in full-hearted tones, her eyes widening almost sensually. She leaned forward confidingly. Up close, she noticed how plumped, pink, and smooth Fenton's skin was, as if he had spent the morning having a mud wrap. He had the overdeveloped pectorals and thickened arms of someone who had spent hours pumping iron. Fenton was a man of many projects. One of them, obviously, was his own body. He shrugged modestly. "Would you like some coffee?" The undersecretary turned her head toward an ebony sideboard. "I noticed you had a tray of coffee already. So thoughtful. But let me get it." She stood up and returned with the tray. There was a pot, polished silver, glass-lined, of freshly brewed coffee, a small ceramic pitcher of milk, and a bowl of sugar. "I'll be mother," Whitfield said, pouring coffee into 2 delicate Limoges, Limoges, cups. She reclined in the Empire chair and took a sip of the perfectly brewed coffee. She liked her coffee black. Fenton, she knew, preferred it heavily sweetened, and she watched him as he shoveled spoonful after spoonful of sugar into his cup, the way he always did. "All that sugar," she murmured in a tone of maternal reproval. "It'll kill you." Fenton took a sip and grinned. "Exciting times, right? You know, I've always been honored to provide whatever help I could. It's a pleasure to work with someone who sees the world the way I do. We both understand that America deserves a safer tomorrow. We both understand one has to combat tomorrow's threat today. Early detection, right?" "Early detection, early treatment," she agreed. "And nobody does it better than your people. Without your operatives and your intelligence systems, we'd never have been able to make so many crucial advances. You're not just a private contractor in our view. You're really a full partner in the mission of preserving the American ascendancy." "We're similar in a lot of ways," Fenton said. "We both like to win. And that's what we've been doing, winning. Winning one for a team that we both believe in." Whitfield watched Fenton as he finished his coffee and returned the empty cup to its saucer. "It's easier to win," she said, "when your opponents don't even know you're playing the game." Her look of gratitude was unwavering. Fenton nodded, vaguely. He closed his eyes and opened them again, as if having a hard time keeping them focused. "But I know you didn't want to meet me here just to congratulate me," he said, slurring his words slightly. "You were going to give me a progress report on Tarquin," she said. "He doesn't know you're at this hotel, I assume. You've taken precautions?" Fenton nodded sleepily. "I met him at a safe house, but he did real good." He yawned. "Excuse me," he said. "I guess jet lag is catching up with me." She refilled his cup. "You must be exhausted with everything that's gone on over the past several days," Whitfield said, her eyes alert. She noticed his mush-mouthed consonants, the way his head was starting to bow. Fenton yawned and sluggishly shifted on the sofa. "This is so strange," she murmured. "I just can't keep my eyes open." "Don't fight it," Whitfield said. "Just let it come." Her agents had had no difficulty in lacing the sugar with a fast-acting CNS depressant, a crystalline derivative of gamma-hydroxybutyrate that, in levels great enough to produce unconsciousness, would elude forensic detection because its metabolites were naturally present in mammalian serum. Fenton's eyes opened for a moment, perhaps responding to the Arctic chill that had entered her tone. He made a sound like a sleeper's muted groan. "I really am sorry." She glanced at her watch. "It was a difficult decision for Ashton and me to make. It's not that we doubt your loyalty. We don't. It's just that, well, you know who I am. You'd be able to connect the dots, and we weren't sure you'd like the picture that results." She glanced at Fenton, now slumped in a position that suggested unconsciousness. Was he even able to hear her words? What she said, however, was no more than the truth. There was a risk that Fenton would feel betrayed if he learned the true nature of the operation he had been enlisted in, and betrayal too often begot betrayal. The upcoming event was too important to allow anything to go wrong. Everyone had to play his part to perfection. As she stared at the motionless body before her, she reflected that Paul Fenton already had.